welcome Derek Brand, who is the Executive Director of Strategic Partnerships and Development at the Columbia University in the city of New York. Derek, how are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here. I stuck around for the last session. I now have a new book to read, which is tremendous. Frankly, I put some slides together, but I really just should have asked you for the breakthrough one slides. Either that, or I should have maybe worked breakthrough one into some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. But it's great that we're here. I kind of pulled a couple things from the last talk, and ultimately, when you invited me in thinking about what to talk about, much of my career has been in startup companies. A lot of it has been as an ecosystem builder in and around New York City. So I really settled on, host, if you could enable screen sharing, that'd be great. But I settled on what I call the power of networks. And effectively, what I wanted to talk about is how networks have basically been, used to build ecosystems. And I want to leave it a little bit on how networks are actually really important for building new ventures in healthcare, and how they can help with your new ventures. So terrific. So as Stan mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of Strategic Partnerships within Columbia's Office of Research Initiatives and Development. I want to give a little brief idea of what we do there, because it'll actually help talk about what we're going to think about a little later. What we do is we put together these multidisciplinary forward-looking research programs. We bring together different stakeholders really to help build the future of places like artificial intelligence, our Streetscapes program, and a number of things in healthcare. Primarily right now, I'm looking at two things that are going to hopefully impact women's health and diabetes. So before we really get to that, though, what I want to talk about is the fact that there is actually some academic backing in how small groups of people can impact and basically build an ecosystem. I'm going to transport you back to San Diego in the 1980s, when there was a biotech company called Hypertech that was acquired by Eli Lilly for $300 million. It doesn't sound like a lot now, but it was a lot then. So there's actually a great paper by a gentleman named Steve Casper about how technology clusters emerge and become sustainable. And effectively, what Steve looked at is the impact of that merger on the San Diego biotech ecosystem. And a wonderful thing happened after Hypertech got bought. Everybody that worked there hated working at Eli Lilly and went to work for startup companies. And effectively what happened, I'm not going to go into what all of this data actually means, but what they showed is that at the companies that were built and growing into the San Diego ecosystem, the leadership of those companies over the course of 1980, 1987, 1984 to 1990 were inextricably tied to leadership at Hypertech. They were very, very effective at helping start new companies, helping grow the ecosystem, to the point where when it spread out in 1995, they weren't the center anymore, but they were really the core that helped drive it for a decade. And why is this important? So I'm going to wind back to New York City in 2007 and 2008. I had gotten here in 2006. And at the time, I was part of a convening organization that was holding these focus groups on how can we make New York a better biotech cluster? Why doesn't New York produce biotech companies the way that San Diego, San Francisco, and Boston do? And invariably, we heard three things. The first thing was that we needed more lab space, which is absolutely true. There was no dedicated lab space that you could just go and figure out where to plunk your company. It was all catch as catch can. You had to basically build it yourself. It was a mess. It was a wasteland. The second thing was we need more capital. So technically, we didn't need more capital. We basically had all the capital in the world. We had the public markets. We had hedge funds. The capital we didn't have was dedicated capital to early stage biotech company funding, right? We didn't have the capital that would come in and start a biotech company, and we needed more of that. And the last thing for the ecosystem was, hey, all the VCs and the entrepreneurs in Boston and San Francisco go to the same bars. They were picking on what basically was the fundamental social underpinnings of the environment. And this was very, very true. I had spent basically the last 2 years while I was at this organization going to every single biotech networking event under the sun. And invariably, they didn't reach the people that were doing the deals. They didn't reach the people that were starting the companies, and it wasn't really reflective of the community. And we had conferences that would come in, but they weren't terribly well connected. There was nothing that actually contiguously brought brought the community together in a way that brought all of the stakeholders of the community together. Now, I had been in Boston for 7 years, and I had a really great model to pull from. There was something called Biotech Tuesdays that was started by Peter Kolchinsky and Seth Taylor, where they very innovatively invited all their friends in biotech to a bar on a Tuesday and turned it into really one of the largest networking organizations that I've seen. It's still around to this day. So with that, I basically devised this plan to say, hey, what we need is this, continuous, repeated networking event that pulls all of the stakeholders of New York City biotech together every single month for a purely social endeavor. These people need to meet people. They need to talk about their ideas. They need to do it out from under the constraints of a PowerPoint presentation. And I got some really helpful feedback from the folks at the convening organization in terms of building this. They said things like, this is a terrible idea. You just want to get people together in bars, and how would you ever pay for this? They basically said, this is terrible. This is never going to work. So when faced with criticism like that, I did what many people do, is I ignored it and I built it myself. I went to some friends of mine that could actually reach into different corners of the ecosystem and build something where we did get together in bars every single month for the better part of a decade, until this pesky little pandemic came along and started to get in the way of something like that. But it grew from an audience of a couple hundred people in the beginning to 5,000 people by the time that we got to about 2020. And I'm going to really hope this works. So please bear with me while I turn off this sound. The important thing, so I'm stealing this video here from One World Trade Center. And effectively what you're looking at is the growth of Lower Manhattan over the course of decades. And this is really an allegory for everything that happened between 2008 and 2020 on the New York biotech ecosystem. It wasn't just me that was building things socially. We had new funds come in. We had people build incubators. We had the Alexandria Center go up to actually house people with lab space. We had a whole group of people that really were making significant strides in terms of how the ecosystem was formed, where we were going to go. And by the end of it, by the time we actually got to the proverbial 102nd floor that we're going to get to at the end of this animation, we were in a place that was much different than it was in 2008. Now, instead of just having academic labs, I've tried on this slide to put together things that didn't exist, whether they were, Versant, Insight, Medical Excellence Capital, A16Z, 2 Sigma, all of these venture funds. None of them were terribly active in New York at that time. Some of them didn't even exist. We now had J Labs and Alexandria and the Cure and Biolabs. We had incubators. We had new companies like Prevail and Calliope. The actual ecosystem had changed, become very, very different. And now New York City is a destination for biotech companies. Now we actually are really leveraging the diversity of academic institutions, entrepreneurs, companies, patients. I want to make sure I include patients in all this because it's a huge, huge, huge advantage of New York. So I am probably not in the best position time-wise here, but we're going to do the best that we can. So ultimately, I want to wrap up with a couple of thoughts on why does this matter, right? The older amongst you may recognize the gentleman on the left is Kevin Bacon. So we think about 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Why does your personal network matter? Well, the first thing is we're in healthcare, and healthcare is a mess, right? We work in an industry where we are going to have to convince a whole host of diverse groups of people about the value of what we're doing. And there are very few people that can do that by themselves. Your network and your ability to reach different people and different groups is really going to be your ability to communicate, your best asset in communicating where the value is in what you're doing. You're never going to be successful operating in only one corner of this quadrant. You're never going to be successful in one niche thing. You really have to include every stakeholder that you can in order to get your value to patients' work and make a difference. And I want to give credit to the DIA Global Annual Meeting folks here for putting together a great graphic to convey just how crazy the future of healthcare is. Secondly, this is a more personal note, but at times during your journey in building your network and building whatever your venture you're going to build, you're going to need people to give you their honest perspective. You're going to need people that want to tell you what they think. You're going to need people that want to tell you what they've been through. And sometimes those people are going to be differently aligned than you. And sometimes all those people aren't going to agree with you. But that does get you away from people who are just excited about what you're building, which is really the empty carbs of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And it is something that can genuinely help you shape your vision for where you want it to be. And finally, networking isn't really something you do on a Tuesday. Networking is something that you cultivate. Networking is something that you do over time, and networking is something that you grow. So Stan, thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to do this.